So we have been going through the book of Daniel, and we went through the first half of the book of Daniel. We even touched on some of those extra biblical books, those extra chapters that were likely not history, but interesting stories. And we heard before again about how Daniel was taken into Babylon, was made a eunuch, was essentially thrust into this college where he had to learn under Nebuchadnezzar's private teachers the wisdom of Babylon. And ultimately, because they stayed faithful to God, both Daniel and his three companions, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah, they were elevated to the top of the Babylonian Empire. And then we heard how the Babylonian Empire, of course, Nebuchadnezzar had this dream, and this dream told Nebuchadnezzar, through Daniel's interpretation, the future kingdoms of the world. And Daniel would actually live through the first couple of those kingdoms, both the Babylonian Empire and then later the Persian Empire. So during the time that the Babylonians were still in power, once Nebuchadnezzar had died, his grandson Belshazzar took the throne. And during Belshazzar's reign, Daniel had some visions. Now, we know in the first half of Daniel, the Persian Empire has already conquered the Babylonians. But now we're stepping back just from the first vision during that first year of Belshazzar. And now we're going to get into the second or the third vision, technically, of Daniel, which is during the third year of Belshazzar, the final year of Belshazzar's reign. So 2 years have passed since chapter 7 of Daniel when we get to chapter 8. Because chapter 7 was in the first year, now we're in the third year, okay? And he is going to have another vision that gives even more details to his previous vision. In his previous vision, God described the kingdoms of the world as these ravenous beasts. One is a lion, being Babylon. One is a lopsided bear, being the Medo-Persian Empire. And one is a leopard with 4 heads and 4 wings. And of course, that would be the Greek Empire. And then there was some beast that couldn't be described. But during the time of that last kingdom, it says it can break the world in pieces. It hasn't been until today that we have weaponry that can break the world in pieces. We actually have that capability. And it all happened during this Roman Empire and its offset, which of course is us. And that was that 4th beast. So now we're going to see this next vision where we're going to get more details on the second and the third beast, particularly the third beast, okay? So we're not seeing it just from God's perspective. We're not seeing it just from man's perspective. We're going to actually see it from the symbolism that each nation assigned to itself. If you guys remember in the Old Testament, whenever the tribes are split up into 12 tribes, each of them had their own banner. And the church history and the Jewish history will tell us that, for example, Judah had a lion on their banner, and that Reuben had a man on his banner, and so on and so forth. That's the same thing for other cities, other countries, other nations. They had symbolism. So now we're going to see these same visions, but using the symbolism of those nations. Okay? So now let's get into Daniel chapter 8, starting with verse 1 and 2. It says, "In the 3rd year of the reign of King Belshazzar, a vision appeared unto me, even unto me Daniel, after that which appeared unto me at the first. And I saw in a vision, and it came to pass, when I saw, that I was in Shushan in the palace, which is in the province of Elam. And I saw in a vision, and I was by the river of Ulai." Okay, so this is one of the Persian royal cities. Now remember, we're still under the Babylonian king, and he's over here to where the Persian Empire will start. So this is where Esther and Nehemiah actually lived as well, in the same area, right? And this might explain, since most of Belshazzar's reign, Daniel had spent it in Shushan, near the Persians. So when Daniel goes back to Babylon, Belshazzar doesn't even know who he is. Do you see how it would make sense if he was 230 miles east of Babylon, that he wouldn't know who this Daniel is, right? So he was probably there as an ambassador. And again, he would have been aware that the Persians were rising in power, because that would have been a big area where they would have to negotiate treaties and things like that. So he was probably very aware that the Babylonian Empire was coming to an end. And also he had those visions from before. So this vision is probably immediately before he returned to Babylon. there's a good chance right after this vision, he went back to Babylon just in time to see Belshazzar be overthrown. So this vision is now looking forward from the end of the Babylonian Empire. So the end of the first empire, where he's going to be looking forward. So, verse 3. Then I lifted up mine eyes and saw, and behold, there stood before the river a ram which had 2 horns. And the 2 horns were high, but one was higher than the other, and the higher came up last. I saw the ram pushing westward and northward and southward, so that no beast might stand before him. Neither was there any that could deliver out of his hand, but he did deliver to his will and became great. So we have 2 horns rising on this ram, and they're rising at separate times, right? The bigger one rises later. Now, remember in our previous vision, there was a lopsided bear, a bear that was kind of leaning over, reared up on one end, one side. This is symbolic of the fact that the Persian Empire wasn't always the Persian Empire. What was it called beforehand? Anyone? Medo-Persian Empire, because the Medes and the Persians were the ones who joined forces. So this Medo-Persian Empire, but ultimately the Persians became the dominant force among them, and they were the ones who were in charge, and that's where we see this ram is more powerful, okay? So guess what the crown worn by the king of the Persians, of course it would be the Darius, the Cyrus, the things like that. Guess what the crown looked like? It was a diadem with a ram's horn, with a ram's horn, with the horns coming out and a ram's head. So the ram was the guardian spirit of the Persian kings. Okay, they actually believed it to be supernatural, just like in India, they would think of cows as being holy. Back then, the Persians saw the rams as being a supernaturally empowered creature, right? So the Persian king, whenever he rose, and again, it's amazing. If you look at the history books and you just look at the Persian Empire, you'll see they never expanded to the east. And guess what? Daniel knew before the Persian Empire even rose that they would not be going to the east. Did you notice which directions? He said they're going to go to the west, to the south, and to the north. And that's exactly what they did. So the Persian Empire, now some people give all kinds of reasons. They think the reason was that there were a lot of powerful tribes in India and in China at the time, and they didn't want to mess with them, and it was a much harsher climate. So practically it didn't make sense, but also biblically the prophecy was they weren't going to go that way, so they didn't go that way. Of course, they didn't know the prophecy. So their kingdom, it wouldn't last too long, but their final king, his name was Xerxes. Do you know what book you might find a story about Xerxes in? In Esther, right. He would lose huge battles to the Greek soldiers. The Greeks would become their thorn in their side. And the Greek soldiers were super highly trained, and they had amazing generals. The Persians had sheer numbers, okay? They were powerful, and they would throw 1 million people at you. Whereas the Greek, if you guys remember the story of the Spartans and the 300 soldiers, they even made a movie about it called 300, where they would defend against massively huger numbers, right? People, they were just outnumbered in every way. So one of the generals of the Greeks is from Macedonia, and his name is Alexander. Have you ever heard of that name? All right. Now, interestingly, you've heard of that name, but you haven't heard of much of the other names of world leaders. You might know there's some important pharaohs, but can you tell me which ones were the big ones? Probably not. Can you tell me which one of the Dariuses was a great leader? Probably not. But you know Alexander the Great. Isn't that interesting? Well, let's see if the Bible actually predicts that. So Alexander, he's going to be the end of the Persian Empire. So the Persian Empire came from the east, traveled west. The most it could go was the small nation of Greece. The small nation of Greece would not let it pass any further. So, verse 5. As I was considering, behold, an he-goat came from the west on the face of the whole earth, came from the west on the face of the whole earth, and touched not the ground. And the goat had a notable horn between his eyes. So now we have a new kingdom, a new king that comes from the west and travels to the east. Guess who does that, by the way? The Greeks, right? That's what Alexander the Great does. And people, he says he's going to be a notable horn. He says a notable horn between his eyes. People are going to remember this name. Before Alexander was even around, Daniel was told this guy is going to make his mark on the world. So a lot of people, they don't remember anything about these other guys, but they remember Alexander of Macedon, better known as Alexander the Great. So we get to verse 6 and 7. And he came to the ram that had two horns, which I had seen standing before the river, and ran unto him in the fury of his power. And I saw him come close to the ram, and he was moved with choler against him, and smote the ram, and brake his two horns, and there was no power in the ram to stand before him. But he cast him down to the ground and stamped upon him, and there was none that could deliver the ram out of his hands. Anyone know how old Alexander the Great was when he took over the kingdom from his father?
Wasn't he like in his young 30s when he died?
32.
Yeah, he was 30. Yeah, he was 32 when he died. So how old was he when he started his campaign? He was actually 20. He conquered the world in 12 years. He actually, well, without vehicles, takes a little bit longer, right? Yeah. So, and whenever you have to move a whole army, even if you're moving fast, it still takes a little bit of time. Well, he was very angry. About 100 years earlier, the Persians had been fighting with the Greeks forever, right? They're just constantly fighting. And he was very upset about this. He actually wrote in a letter to Darius, he says, your ancestors came into Macedonia and the rest of Greece and have treated us ill without any previous injury from us. I, having been appointed commander and chief of the Greek, when wishing to take revenge on the Persians, crossed over into Asia, hostilities being begun by you. He claims he's coming for revenge. He says, I'm going to take out the Persians and I'm going to go as far east as I have to because they have mistreated my people for so long. Okay, now, is that the only reason? Was it financially driven? There's all kinds of theories out there, but that's the only reason he ever gave, right? So within 6 years of starting his campaign against Persia, Alexander conquers the Persian Empire. And he went from the Mediterranean all the way to India, and then he died in Babylon at age 32, right? So anyone want to guess? The Macedonians, what is the symbol of their city? Now, in the image here, in the vision, it's a shaggy goat. Anyone want to guess what the Macedonians' city animal was? Shaggy goat, right? It was the shaggy goat. And guess how many horns it had? It was a unicorn, and not like the goats we think, right? It was a single-horned goat. And this one had a notable horn that was rising from this goat, right? So in our previous vision from the last chapter, we had Greece represented as this four-headed leopard with four wings, okay? So why did it have four heads there, but here it's a single goat with a single horn? Well, I guess we're going to see that horn break off, and it's going to be replaced with how many horns? 4. You see, the symbolism is very similar in the previous one, in 4 generals. That's right. So verse 8 says, therefore the he-goat waxed very great, and when he was strong, the great horn was broken. For it came up 4 notable ones toward the 4 winds of heaven. So when Alexander's at the pinnacle of his power, he dies suddenly. And he dies again at Babylon 11 years after starting his campaign. And his kingdom is split between 4 notable ones. The first one is named Cassander, and he took Macedonia and Greece. That would be where Greece is now, right? We look over there north of the Mediterranean. Then you have Lysimachus, which took Asia Minor. Think about where Turkey is in that region. Then you have Seleucus, who took Syria to India. That would be more towards the Middle East and a little bit south of Turkey, okay? And then you have Ptolemy, who took North Africa. He took Egypt. He took Arabia, like where we think of Saudi Arabia today. He took in other parts of Asia Minor. Do you want to guess which country kind of was the central meeting ground of these 4 kingdoms? Israel. Huh. Weird how that works. So Israel turns out to be this battleground between these dynasties, right? So now we get to verse 9 and 10. And by the way, if anyone has any questions, please speak up. So verse 9 and 10 says, and out of one of them came forth a little horn, which waxed exceeding great, towards the south and towards the east and towards the pleasant land being Israel. And it waxed great, even to the host of heaven, and it cast down some of the host and of the stars to the ground, and stamped upon them. Now, that's kind of a weird verse, but luckily it's explained to us later in this chapter. The host of heaven that it's referring to are the faithful in Israel. There are those in Israel that are stamped to the ground, that are destroyed, that are believers in Israel. So stamping, we know, means defeating and overthrowing. Okay, that's what this person is doing. And we saw in verse 7, if you remember, the ram stamped on the ram stamped on the goat, stamped on the ram. The ram was stamped by the goat, which means they were defeated and destroyed. So this vision, like I said, will be interpreted later in this chapter, and we'll see where he talks about how he overthrows some of these people, some of these faithful people. So we get to verse 11. He says, yea, he magnified himself even to the prince of the host, and by him the daily sacrifice was taken away, and the place of his sanctuary was cast down. So this particular leader, coming from one of these four kingdoms of the Greeks, one of these four split kingdoms of this Greek empire, is going to block Israel's ability to perform her religious rituals, right? Well, it's going to lead to the Maccabean revolt. That's right. So he's going to stop them from using the temple to worship God. They won't be able to do it. He's going to desecrate the temple. This is important because some of the details are going to be, I believe, prophetic. So verse 12 through 14. And a host was given him against the daily sacrifice by reason of transgression. And it cast down the truth to the ground, and it practiced and prospered. Then I heard one saint speaking, and another saint said unto that certain saint which spake, how long shall be the vision concerning the daily sacrifice, and the transgression of desolation, to give both the sanctuary and the host to be trodden under foot? And he said unto me, unto 2,300 days, then shall the sanctuary be cleansed. So, summarizing what we just read, a ruler is going to despise the truths that are taught in the temple. He's going to hate the people of Israel, and they are in his way, and he is going to hate the things that they teach. And he is going to want to stop their worship in their temple. So he is going to want to desecrate their temple, do something where they can no longer use it to worship God. Now, history tells us who this was. His name was Antiochus IV, also known as Antiochus Epiphanes, okay? He is Cleopatra's brother. So he became king of that Syrian kingdom, and the way he became king, by the way, is pretty rough. He murders his brother, okay? Seleucus Philopator, I think his name, Philopator, something like that. And he took the throne, and he was supposed to give it to his brother's son, to his nephew, but instead he bribes people to support him instead, and he makes himself king. So he usurps power. And then later he invades Egypt and fights against Ptolemy. He defeats Ptolemy, and he rules this empire at the time. And he made Jerusalem this buffer city, this city between the two empires, so that he would know if anybody was going to move to rebel against him, they would have to go through Jerusalem or Israel, and that would be kind of his early warning system, right? So we have a non-biblical book that is in the Catholic Bible, but it's not in the Protestant Bible, okay? And it wasn't originally considered canon, and the Jews don't consider it canon. But it still has some important historical information in it. And that's the book of Maccabees, First Maccabees, okay? And in chapter 1 of First Maccabees, in verse 44 through 49, it talks about some messengers that were sent to Jerusalem specifically to profane the laws of God, specifically to speak against the scripture of the Old Testament, and to encourage the people to disobey God, to follow strange customs. So he had them worship idols, and then to not circumcise their children, leave them uncircumcised and disobey God, and essentially become abominations to God's law. All right. So he tries to bring his Hellenistic multi-God view, right? Polytheistic view into the area. And that corruption began in 170 BC. And then over the next few months, he starts spreading this across the area. And then about 3.5 years later, he decides to sacrifice a bull and set up an image of Zeus in the temple, in the Holy of Holies, right? He desecrates the temple. And then the Maccabeans, they decide to stage an uprising, and they actually are able to defeat him over the next 3.5 years. And over the next 3.5 years, even though they're overwhelmingly outnumbered, they succeed, and they're finally able to rededicate the temple in 164 BC. Does anything sound familiar? And it happened, by the way, on December 25th, if you're wondering why Christmas is when it is. That's when they rededicated the temple. So 170 BC, he starts 169, 168, 167, 166, 165, 164. 7 years. Strange, interesting. Sounds a little familiar to some other things I've heard regarding the end of time. Also, there's an abomination of desolation that happened right in the center of that time period. But this is all seen as one unit, not two separate units, but one unit of his corruption, his desolation, and his authority. Does anyone want to guess what this guy is a model of?
Yeah.
The Antichrist. So if this was a model of the Antichrist, which we're going to see in the next part of the chapter, we have seen that his corruption lasted, if you go by the days given, 6.5 years. If you go by the time he started his corruption, about 7 years. So when this early precursor of the Antichrist is there, it's a 7-year period of time that he is running the show in Jerusalem. And of course, halfway through that, he desecrates the temple. Okay, so have all that history behind us. Let's see verse 15. These are all things that Daniel predicted before they happened, but us reading them now, it's history, right? So now we're going on. It says, and it came to pass, when I, even I, Daniel, had seen the vision and sought for the meaning, then behold, there stood before me as the appearance of a man. And I heard a man's voice between the banks of Ulai, which called and said, Gabriel, make this man to understand the vision. So he came near where I stood, and when he came, I was afraid, and fell upon my face. But he said unto me, Understand, O Son of Man, for at the time of the end shall be the vision. Now this is interesting. There's somebody commanding angels here talking and telling the angels, hey, tells Gabriel, explain it to Daniel, explain what this vision means. Now you can speculate on who that man was. I tend to think it's Jesus. But like I said, this doesn't say that explicitly here. So Gabriel explains to Daniel that you're not just seeing the near future, you're seeing the time of the end. There is a double fulfillment of this prophecy. There is this guy, but the vision's actually going to be completed in the very end of time, in the latter end, right? So he's telling him that this guy is a model of what is coming. He's not it's not the only thing that we're prophesying here. So there's going to be a guy that rises to power, is initially welcomed by Israel, but his corruption leads to the abomination of desolation, and there's going to be a big revolt, which history again tells us that. So verse 18 and 19. Now, as he was speaking with me, I was in a deep sleep on my face towards the ground, but he touched me and set me upright. And he said, Behold, I will make thee know what shall be in the last end, not just the end, but the last end of the indignation. For at the time appointed, the end shall be. So we haven't even gotten to the next kingdom, the Iron Kingdom, this strange beast. He's like, but I'm going to tell you what's going to happen at the last end. Okay. So what is the last end? It's talking about, again, the very last time of the Gentiles. There's this future event that still has not happened today. So what is going to happen is an appointed time where the end of days will happen, where the end of all kingdoms will come to a conclusion and Jesus will arrive. This is what happens at that transition point. So we get back now, we're going to see the whole vision explained, and we're going to talk about the final picture of the Antichrist. So Daniel chapter 8, verse 20, down through 22. He says, The ram which thou sawest having 2 horns are the kings of Media and Persia, and the rough goat is the king of Grecia, and the great horn that is between his eyes is the first king. Now that being broken, whereas 4 stood up, 4 kingdoms shall stand up out of the nation, but not in his power. So there's no guesswork regarding the second and third kingdoms, excuse me. And there's no guesswork regarding the Alexander the Great. He was the first king of Greece. And all of this, again, had to happen because of the prophecy. And can you imagine how easy it would have been to break this prophecy? If biblical prophecy was just made up. The Bible said very clearly, the first king is going to be super powerful. And then as soon as he dies, 4 kings are going to replace him, and none are going to be as powerful. All you had to do was appoint one other person a king, have 2 people take the kingdom, have 7 people take the kingdom. It had to be exactly 4. And guess what? It was exactly 4. everything precisely. How seriously, and I would say literally, but some people take that too far, do you take the prophecies of the Bible? Was this spiritualized? It was an animal, it was a symbol, but when he explained it, it was meant to be taken as spoken. 4 horns, 4 kings, period. Not, oh, he means 4 energies or 4 levels or 4 stages. No, he tells you what it is, right? Doesn't need spiritualized. Verse 23, it says, and in the latter time of their kingdom, this is interesting. In the latter time of their kingdom, when the transgressors are come to the full, a king of fierce countenance and understanding dark sentences shall stand up. Wait a minute. The latter time of their kingdom? What happened to the Greek nation? Is it over yet? Or is it still around?
The Romans took it.
The Romans took over the empire. What about the Greek nation? Can you go visit Greece today? Is it still ran by the Greeks? It sure is, right? So whenever Antiochus Epiphanes arises, the Greek Empire is not over yet. He shows up in 146 BC was whenever the Greek Empire ended. It was some 30 years earlier that Antiochus Epiphanes shows up. So he wasn't the final guy of the Greek Empire. And he's saying in the latter time of their kingdom, well, that means Greece is still around. We're still not in the latter time of their kingdom. Before Greece ends, there's going to arise a king of fierce countenance, a very powerful king who understands dark sentences. He will arise, okay? So this is not talking about the fall of the Greek Empire. This is talking about the end of all time. This is at the end before Jesus returns. This is talking about the rise of the Antichrist. And we read in verse 24 and 25, you'll see the picture more clearly. It says, and his power shall be mighty, but not of his own power. And he shall destroy wonderfully, and shall prosper, and shall practice, and shall destroy the mighty and the holy people. And through his policy also, he shall cause craft to prosper in his hand, and he shall magnify himself in his heart, and by peace shall destroy many. He shall also stand up against the prince of princes, but he shall be broken without hand. Well, this guy is something else. Jesus wasn't born in the world till either 2 BC or 080, the year 0. But this guy's, whoever we're talking about now, he will stand against the Messiah. He's going to stand against Jesus, the Prince of Princes. We can't be talking about Antiochus Epiphanes anymore. We're talking about a yet coming evil person, a yet coming king. And of course, he is way more powerful than Antiochus, or Antiochus, however you pronounce it. He is more powerful than even the notable horn, Alexander the Great. Alexander the Great was impressive, but did you notice he says he will be mighty, talking about this guy. He will be mighty. He will destroy wonderfully. That means when people see the destruction he causes, they are filled with wonder. Doesn't mean it's a good thing, like it's wonderful. It means he fills you with wonder to see how completely he annihilates his enemies, right? He will prosper. He will have victory in defeating the people of God. Yes, ma'am.
You're saying then that this guy existed at the end of the Grecian.
I'm saying we're not yet at the end of the Grecian Empire because Greece still exists today.
You're saying that Christ is really Greek?
No, I'm saying that he will come up before Greece falls. That's a good question, though. Okay. So he is going to destroy the mighty people. He's going to stand against Jesus. Jesus has to have come on the earth before this prophecy can be fulfilled. So this is someone else, okay? So, but he is bringing him up and comparing him to the greatest conqueror that ever conquered. Alexander the Great was the notable horn, more powerful than Nimrod, more powerful than the pharaohs, more powerful than Nebuchadnezzar. And he says, but this guy is on another level. And it's not his own power he's using. He will think greatly of himself. He will magnify himself in his heart. So this guy, he will stand against the Messiah, but not with his own power. He's going to be empowered by Satan. Notice he says that power, but in verse 24, not by his own power. So again, where does the Antichrist power come from? Well, let's see. Revelation 13:2. The beast which I saw was like unto a leopard. Now listen to the imagery given. He's as powerful as all the previous kingdoms. Remember Daniel's vision had the lion, had the leopard, had the bear. This guy says in chapter 13, verse 2 of Revelation, this beast, this Antichrist, which I saw was like a leopard, and his feet were as the feet of a bear, and his mouth as the mouth of a lion. And the dragon gave him his power and his seat and great authority. So we see this guy we're talking about now. We have shifted away from history, and we're back in the realm of prophecy because this has not yet happened. Okay? Verse 26 and 27. And the vision of the evening and the morning, which was told, is true. Therefore, shut thou up the vision, for it shall be for many days. He says this is going to be yet distant future. It's not next week, not next month, not next empire. It's going to be a long time coming. And what did Daniel do when he saw this? What would we all do? And I, Daniel, fainted and was sick certain days. And afterward I rose up and did the king's business. And I was astonished at the vision, but none understood it. He has seen some amazing visions so far. And this vision blew him away. When he saw this guy, it was something else, right? So Daniel learns of the coming kingdoms of the world, and he knows that this coming king is going to cause craft to prosper in his hand, okay? So what does it mean that I'm going to cause craft by my policy? The word policy is also the word wisdom. So by his wisdom, he is going to cause craft. The word used there for craft means deception. He's going to fill the whole world with deception. Sorry about that. Turn my ringer off here. So he's going to have deception fill the entire world, and even the elect could be deceived whenever he was in power, right? So, and he's going to magnify himself. What does the Antichrist say about himself? He says, I'm going to be God. I want to have power. And he's going to set up an image of himself. Now, what that image means, is it a statue? Is it AI? We don't know. But he is going to perform this abomination of desolation. His power, like we said, is from Satan. He's going to destroy people by enforcing a covenant. By his peace, he's going to destroy many. So that means that there are going to be people who claim that he's coming and he's going to fix the problems of the world. He's going to bring peace to the world. And by him saying, no, I'm a peacekeeping force, he's going to wipe out thousands, millions, who knows how many. And that can be true even with peacekeeping forces. Go right now, at least historically, to the borders, let's say, between Israel and Palestine. There are people keeping the peace. Do people not die there? They die there all the time. Peacekeeping can cause death. And he's going to destroy the people. By the way, which horseman is the one that represents the Antichrist? Which seal? The white horse? And which one is that? Seal number 1. So when does this guy show up on the scene? Well, we know that he's going to be the first horseman, and we know he's going to stand against Jesus, the Prince of Princes. And Jesus, how will Jesus defeat him, by the way? Sort of his mouth, with his words, right? So in Matthew 24, of course, we have the miniature revelation, right? The Olivet Discourse, where we have a summary of Revelation. I'm going to read a few verses there. Then here in a minute, I'm going to read to you a little bit from Luke. So in Matthew 24, he says, when you therefore shall see the abomination of desolation spoken of by Daniel the prophet, stand in the holy place. Whoso readeth, let him understand. Then let them which be in Judea flee into the mountains. Let him which is on the housetop not come down to take anything out of his house, neither let him which is in the field return to take his clothes. And woe unto them that are with child, and to them that give suck in those days. But pray ye that your flight be not in the winter, neither on the Sabbath day. For then shall be great tribulation, such as was not since the beginning of the world to this time, no, nor ever shall be. And except those days should be shortened, there shall no flesh be saved. But for the elect's sake, those days shall be shortened. So, Jesus is verifying that the abomination of desolation, which Antiochus Epiphanes did, happened, but there's yet a future abomination of desolation, because Jesus's time on earth was after Antiochus Epiphanes, and Jesus was saying, when this happens, be ready. So there's a future abomination of desolation. Okay, now all of this can sound pretty terrifying, right? He prospers against the people of God. He destroys many. He tramples them under feet, right? But you know, there's a way to avoid all that, despite what a lot of the internet might be telling you right now. You can avoid the beginning of sorrows. You can avoid the opening of the seals. You can avoid the blowing of the trumpets. You can avoid the pouring of the vials. How can you do that? Well, Jesus gave us a conversation, this Olivet Discourse, which I just read you a section out of. And there is a way out besides death. Well, let's see. In Luke 21, I'm just going to read a few passages here and there. Verse 7, they asked him, Master, when shall all these things be? And what sign will there be when these things shall come to pass? Well, he starts with seal number 1, the false Christ. He says in Luke 21, verse 8, he said, take heed that you be not deceived. For many shall come in my name, saying, I am Christ, and the time draweth near. Go ye not therefore after them. Seal number 2, there's going to be wars, right? Wars and famines going to cross the world. He says in Luke, seal number 2, Luke 21, verse 9, but when you shall hear of wars and commotions, be not terrified, for these things must first come to pass, but the end is not by and by. Then we get seal 3 and 4. We get famines, disease, and death, right? He says in Luke 21:11, great earthquakes in diverse places, famines, pestilences, fearful sights, and great signs shall there be from heaven. Seal 5, you shall be betrayed by parents, brethren, kinsfolk, and friends, and some shall cause you to be put to death, and you shall be hated of all men for my name's sake. Remember, we see all those dead in heaven saying they were murdered for their faith. Then we get seal 6 and 7 into the trumpets, where it talks about in Luke 21, verse 25, and there shall be signs in the sun and in the moon and in the stars, upon the earth distress of nations with perplexity, the sea and the waves roaring. And then you finally, with the trumpets and the vials, says in verse 26, men's hearts failing them for fear and for looking after those things which are coming on the earth, for the powers of heaven shall be shaken. You remember the stars falling to the earth and all these things. This is, again, the mini revelation. But then what does Jesus say before he's done with this conversation? Verse 36, watch ye therefore. What's therefore mean? Because of everything I just told you, keep your eyes open, watch, and pray always that you may be accounted worthy to escape all these things that shall come to pass. So how am I going to escape? If they're going to happen to the whole world, how can I escape? Oh, I'm sorry, I didn't finish the verse. And to stand before the Son of Man. Is there a way out that is not death? He already talked about people dying. That's clearly not the way out. But he says you can avoid all of that if you find yourself worthy. And did he start at the abomination of desolation? Or did he start with the revealing of the false Christ? He started through all of it. You can avoid it all. And when you get to the book of Revelation, you find that the Antichrist is in the first seal. So that what part do we get removed from if we are worthy? And the question is, what makes us worthy? Or rather, who makes us worthy? Jesus Christ, right? Okay. That sums it up for today. Any final thoughts, questions, comments? It did. It's 8:05. We're still finishing a little early tonight.
What was that last verse?
Luke 21, verse 36. Anybody online got any questions, comments?
Guys, super quick.
Yes. Yeah, Debbie.
Okay, so back in verse 14, Antiochus is a model of Satan.
Not Satan, of the Antichrist.
Oh, Antichrist.
Mhm.
Okay. And then he was defeated 3.5 years later. And then we jumped to 7 years.
No,
I
no.
got lost.
So Antiochus goes through and makes war against Egypt, okay, from his from his empire over in the Syrian area. And as he goes over, he starts to bring his false views, his Hellenistic mindset to Israel for 3.5 years. At the end of that 3.5 years, he then sacrifices a bull and sets up a statue of Zeus in the temple. That
Okay.
desecrates the temple. So we're 3.5 years in. Then for the next 3.5 years, the Maccabeans revolt against him, and they revolt against him and ultimately have victory. So then they are able to rededicate the temple at the end of the 7-year period. So 3.5 years, then he causes the abomination, and then there's a fight for the next 3.5 years, and then altogether that comes up to 7 years. And
Okay.
it's not exactly 7 years. So based on the numbers, it's somewhere like 6.4, 6.8, something like that.
Okay.
Okay,
Trying to take notes as fast as I can.
no problem. That's why there's videos. Any other questions?
That
Yes.
brings me to a question.
Yeah, I broke down.
Earlier, when you were talking about that, you said some books were not canon. So if anybody watches online doesn't know what canon means, could you describe that?
Sure. So we have canon, or the accepted texts of the Bible. And essentially, whenever you look back in history, we have the Old Testament, which the Jews considered scripture. And there was only so many books that they considered scripture. And they are the same books that we use in the Protestant Old Testament, or the typical Bible. The 66 books of the Bible, you have the Old Testament books, which are identical to what the Jews consider scripture. Now, with that being said, there was a variety of other books that were in the Old Testament that the Catholics use, because they took what we call these apocryphal, or what they call deuterocanonical books, which weren't part of the original canon, but were considered useful reading with useful information. So they weren't God-inspired scripture, but they were useful. And the Bible itself actually references a number of non-biblical books to talk about things that happened if you want more details. So it doesn't make them wrong. We just can't use them to build doctrine, but we can use them to understand what the thinking of the day might have been. If that makes sense. Thank you, Del. All right, guys, anything else? All right.